We're live. How is everybody doing? AEW Dynamite Grand Slam has just gone off the air, went off the air about 10 minutes or so ago. And huge expectations going into this show, obviously, which I think a lot of people expected to be the case. I still do think this is going to deliver AEW's biggest audience ever that they've had on TNT. Of course, the biggest one that they've ever had on TNT is the 1.4 million that they had in the debut episode back in October 2019. And to be honest with you, I expect it to beat this, considering the card that they had, considering the crowd that they had, over 20,000, I think 177, did they say, was in Arthur Ashe Stadium in Queens, New York. It's the biggest crowd that AEW has ever done. For reference, it's twice the biggest crowd that TNA has ever done or ever did in its history. So we're talking a real significant number. We're talking a real significant show for AEW. We're talking a real significant moment for their company. And I think overall, on the whole, I think it would probably be unfair to say that it's a one-man show, a one-match show, because maybe that's not fair. But it was the Kenny Omega versus Bryan Danielson show. That was it. That was just that. It was the Kenny Omega Bryan Danielson show, and anything else is almost disingenuous to say. Was the outcome really what you were looking for? I think, as I mentioned in the watch long, I think the outcome was the right one. I don't see how they could have gone with anything else, to be honest with you. If you think about it, what other finish could they do? Could they do Kenny Omega winning the match and beating Bryan Danielson clean in his first match, or even if it was a screwy finish? Could they do that? No, because it doesn't get over Bryan Danielson. Not that he needs to be got over, but it wouldn't be the right move. Would they have Bryan Danielson come in and beat the AEW World Champion in his first match in the company? They wouldn't have that either. So I think the time limit draw was kind of what they needed to go with. It was kind of, they had no choice when it comes to the finish. Apart from that, it's as good of a match you'll find. And if anything, the only problem was that matches had to follow that. Because how do you follow that match? Now, I've seen some people saying, well, because the match was so good, because the match was so incredible, why wouldn't you have that match main event the show? And I think there's several reasons why they probably decided not to go down that route. I think obviously the main one, like I said, is the time limit draw. I think they might have been concerned how the crowd would react to a time limit draw ending the episode, but I don't know. Given the quality of the match, I don't think the crowd would have minded that much. I think probably the bigger concern that they would have had, and people might not like this, but it's a logistical point of view you probably have to consider when you're producing a live pro wrestling show, where you're bound between you go on the air at 8 p.m. and you have to be off the air by 10 p.m. That's the time frame that TNT have given you. I would assume a concern that they probably had, and I might be wrong here, but I would assume a concern that they probably had was that if we let Bryan Danielson and Kenny Omega be the main event of the show, there is a potential, not necessarily to say that this would happen, but there would be a potential that we could see a situation whereby some match goes long, some segment goes long, then we run out of time. How can we do the time limit draw when there's not enough time to do it, if you will? Now, obviously, they could switch things and go with TV time remaining. They could do that, but in reality, they wanted to go 30 minutes. They knew this match needed to have time. If they gave it time, it would be a massive success and it would be a tremendous match. They didn't want to have to say, we did want you to go 30 minutes, but because something else went long and this and that, or we've got to cut the commercial, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. You've only got 15 actually, or actually you only got 17 because we had to cut this for time, or this went a little bit long, or whatever. You remove any doubt. You remove any problems by having Omega and Bryan Danielson go on first. So I think it was the smart move to put it on first, because you remove any problems. Again, not that it's a screwy finish, but it's not a decisive finish, and you would be concerned about ending a show like that as well. So I think it was the right call. And did it mean that the main event was a little bit flat? Yeah. Because again, how do you follow that? You can't. But sometimes that's how it works. A lot of people will say, if I'm not the main event, I'm more than happy to go on first. Why? Because the crowd's red hot. The crowd was red hot. Arguably, would that have crowd been as excited or that red hot if this match was the main event? They might have had to work a little bit harder. They didn't have to do anything. And that crowd was all over it. That crowd was all over that match. All over it. Why? Because they knew. Because they were into it. They were into Bryan Danielson. They were into this match. It was a dream match. And I mentioned this on the watch along as well. So many times in life, but certainly in pro wrestling, when you hype something up and you build it up that it's going to be the greatest thing ever, it's a dream match. The problem is a lot of the times with dream matches, dream movies, dream scenarios, is they're kind of in your imagination for a reason. And your imagination has a tendency to make things seem greater than actually possible. And when reality strikes, it can never live up to the imagination of one's mind. I'm very, very happy to say that this was a dream match, and I think we've barely scratched the surface, and they went 30 minutes tonight, and it was 5 stars. Not whatever that means, whatever 5 stars means, but for what was, again, a dream match. And again, I don't think they even scratched the surface. I would love to see Omega Bryan get a pay-per-view match, which is a 60-minute time limit for the championship, and I would like them to go to a time limit draw again, twice. Not only would they go for a time limit draw on Grand Slam edition of Dynamite, I want to see them go to a time limit draw at Full Gear, and that's 60 minutes. I want to see Bryan Danielson and Kenny Omega wrestle 60 minutes, and they still don't have a winner, and then you have to go to something decisive. I think that would be a really interesting way to do it. Bryan Danielson's in AEW to, like he said, to wrestle the best and to put on great matches that maybe he wouldn't be able to do in WWE. And I think by going another time limit draw, this time 60 minutes, with Kenny Omega would be just that. So I enjoyed it immensely. And I think, like everyone, it was tremendous. It was tremendous. 30-minute time limit draw, right outcome. I think it's the right outcome. Again, I know some people would probably want a decisive finish, but they kind of booked themselves into a corner, which WWE tends to do. But I think it was tremendous. D-Star says a draw was the only logical finish at this moment. Corey says a draw was perfectly fine for me and naturally leads to a match in the future, which could probably be even better than this. My thoughts exactly, Corey. John just saying hi. Hi, John. How you doing? So I was obviously absolutely thrilled by that match. That was then followed by a promo by CM Punk. CM Punk came out and cut a promo. Of course, he's going to be wrestling. Technically now, he's technically going to be wrestling in the next hour or so, the next few minutes, because they're going to be taping, of course, Rampage, Grand Slam, and that's going to be airing on Friday. But it's going to be taped. It's going to be taped tonight too. So Punk came out, cut a promo talking about Team Taz, Powerhouse Hobbs. Of course, he's facing him on Friday as well. It was interesting, the Punk promo, because it was like Punk said when he came out there. He was like, how do you follow that? And it was true. He came out and he sort of said, just how do you follow that? How can you follow that match? You can't. And I think everyone knew that. Everyone knew that on the card. If anything, for me, the only match that I think actually did a successful job in properly following it, in terms of really getting the crowd going once again, and the crowd was into lots of stuff, but in terms of really rocking it, was Sting and Darby. I think they absolutely killed it. Absolutely killed it. They did tremendous. Not to say that the other matches didn't do well, because they did, but we're talking the Sting match. I mean, we'll get into it, but it was absolutely tremendous. Tremendous. So Punk comes out, Punk cuts a promo, talks about Powerhouse Hobbs, talks about how people said they want to see the pissed off, the angry CM Punk, but he's got nothing to be angry about. How can he be angry when they're singing Cult of Personality and they're chanting his name and all this kind of stuff? It was arguably, I mean, let's remove the first return CM Punk promo, because that promo is not going to be beat in terms of the raw emotion, how real it was. Arguably, in terms of a promo of a storyline, it's probably Punk's best promo he's cut. I think it had a bit of energy, had a bit of venom to it, and it was tremendous. It was a tremendous promo, and it just goes to show the strength of the AEW roster right now, doesn't it? That how do you follow a 5-star match? Give CM Punk a live microphone and give him TV time. It's unbelievable that having that kind of stuff on your roster in 2021 with a sort of a loose creative structure is very exciting. Very, very exciting. So I enjoyed Punk's promo. I thought it was very good. Sabishi says, in my opinion, this show was 8.5 out of 10. Started off great with Kenny versus Bryan, and in my opinion, 6 stars, and ended while boosting the women's division. Again, I don't really do star ratings or anything like that, but I did think it was a very strong show. Like I said at the beginning of the stream, I would be very, very surprised if this doesn't break or get very close to AEW's record viewership total, which is that 1.4 million mark. I mean, if it could blow out the water. I mean, I thought when Punk returned, I didn't think Rampage would scratch 1 million. It did well over 1 million. Who knows? At this point, who knows? They could do something crazy. I think the demo will be very strong because AEW has a young audience, and that match and they knew. And again, that first opening quarter of the show went about at least over 20 minutes with no commercial. And they planned that. They planned that because they wanted as much people watching it as possible. It's like when they do an overrun and they don't go to commercial. They basically did the overrun at the front of the show by just not having any commercials for like 22 minutes, and they made up for it later on. Maybe that's why they wanted to do it as well. I think a lot of it came to the timing of it came to formatting. I really do. I think that came into it. So after the CM Punk promo, we had Brian Pillman Jr. versus MJF. Fine match. Obviously the biggest match, certainly, of Brian Pillman Jr.'s career. I think he did a fine job. In the match. Typical babyface match. There was no doubt in my mind MJF was going to win. He was always going to win. Always going to win that match. So he gets the victory. Brian Pillman goes for a springboard. MJF counters, sort of the earth armbar, makes him tap out. Again, whilst it was the biggest match of Brian Pillman Jr.'s career, but easily the most impressive performance, certainly. When he came out, you could see that he was emotional. And I've really enjoyed it. I must say I've really enjoyed it. I think that obviously the AEW roster is stacked, and there is a ton of people on there, and part of the problem is how do you fit them onto that show? But make no mistake here, there are names like CM Punk, like Chris Jericho, like John Moxley, like Eddie Kingston, that maybe would have wanted to be on the Grand Slam edition of Dynamite tonight because it's probably going to be viewed by more people than Friday's show. And yet they had a spot on the show for Brian Pillman Jr., who was an up-and-coming guy, and I say lesser known, but what I mean in terms of experience, and they had him on this show. And I think that speaks volumes. I think that really speaks volumes to what AEW sees in Brian Pillman Jr. and the trust that they have. And, from what is just really an angle to get some heat on MJF after he lost to Jericho at All Out, it's sort of developed into a nice little TV storyline, hasn't it? With MJF and maybe crossing the line and, Brian Pillman Jr.'s sister and talking about his father and talking about his mother and all that kind of stuff. I thought it was fun. I think it would probably be over now. I would think MJF probably moves on to the next feud. Who that feud is against, I have no idea. This is part of the problem. I mean, MJF's been feuding with Jericho for 12 months. So who does he even feud with next? who does he face off against next? Interesting, though. Interesting. But MJF got the win, which was to be expected. So after this one, we had Malachi Black versus Cody Rhodes. And thankfully, AEW made the right call. One of my biggest concerns coming into this show wasn't would Bryan Danielson and Kenny Omega deliver, all that kind of stuff. My biggest concern is that Cody's got to get his win back, brother. And we're going to see what we always see with Cody is eventually he wins and we move on. But that wasn't the case. Malachi Black gets the victory. I would probably say this might be the match that was maybe the most disappointing on the show. It was just clunky. It was really clunky. There was no rhythm really to it. The best thing about it, arguably, was Malachi Black's entrance, which is badass. But it just felt, very clunky. Never really got going. It kind of felt like they were off pace, off rhythm with each other. Not to say it was a bad match, but it felt like it never really got to its level that it could be. Maybe that's because the crowd, I wouldn't say the crowd hijacked it because they didn't. The crowd told AEW and specifically Cody Rhodes what we have been saying for a long time. And again, I don't want to sort of preach myself as a Nostradamus here at all, because I'm not. But I think my view on Cody Rhodes reflects a lot of people's views on Cody Rhodes right now, is that, you need the heel turn. The heel turn is so needed. And I've been saying it for weeks and weeks and weeks at this point. You just have to listen to the crowd. You listen to the crowd every time this guy goes out. And this is a crowd that's pro-Cody. He helped make this company. Yeah, he comes out, he gets a mixed response. The reason he gets a mixed response is because the crowd wants something different. And the crowd is just tired. They're tired of constantly being told and just paintbrushed by people in AEW telling you, the viewer, how much of a big star Cody is. Cody's a big star. Oh, he's this big star. He's got a reality show. Oh, he's on TBS, the Go Big Show. He's got celebrity friends, Snoop Dogg. Recorded his entrance theme. He wrestled Shaq. And all this kind of stuff. It's like, we get it. And then that's one thing. And then he does like the media interviews. And he just says like bullshit stuff when he goes like, oh, every time I do a promo, I have a focus group, or I try and, I try and, what was the other thing? It was a focus group. It's just like marketing speak. And this is someone that's worked in marketing for a long period of time. We've a focus group, and I was like, I workshop my promos, and I focus group it and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, oh. Or when they asked him last year about the women's championship match, I think it was Nyla Rose and Hikaru Shida. They go, why hasn't that really one had a storyline? He goes, every match doesn't need to have a storyline. Every match doesn't need to have an angle or something they're feuding over. It's like, well, what are your feuds then? Your feuds are like Shakespearean dramas, the amount of back and forth you have in it. So it's comments like that, and it's just stuff like that where you go, oh. Or it's like the promo he did with Anthony Ogogo earlier this year when he talks about the American dream and privilege and all this kind of stuff. It's like, what are you talking about? And that's why the crowd booed Cody Rhodes tonight. It's that kind of stuff that's been quietly accumulating over time, and the crowd's just tired of it. And it makes Cody's office, so it makes him already booable. And he has this perception like he's putting himself over a lot of the time, or giving himself... Again, I mentioned it on the watch along, just self-gratifying storylines. I'm going to feud with QT Marshall. Well, who gives a shit about that? Seriously, who cares about that? Oh, I'm going to have the Nightmare Factory turn on me, and they're going to become the Factory. Oh, and someone on the video described it perfectly before as the Codyverse. And you could just tell there was 20,000 people in that stadium tonight, over 20,000, and they booed the hell out of Cody Rhodes because they're tired of it. They are tired of it. They want to see something different. So the finish of the match comes. Cody Rhodes hits the crossroads. Malakai Black kicked out, thankfully. And Arn Anderson gets up on the apron. He tried to sort of come round onto the other side of the apron and swing himself around the ring post, and he fell down on the floor. He fell down on his ass. And I thought it was meant to be part of it, but it obviously wasn't because he was meant to be on the apron, so he just fell over. But eventually he got back up. Cody Rhodes runs into him, goes to the outside. Arn Anderson shoves him, says, what are you doing? Get back in the ring. Gets back in the ring. It was a distraction needed so that Malakai Black could spit black mist into the face of Cody Rhodes. It was funny because he obviously went under the ring, got the black, it's food dye, it's food coloring, food dye in his mouth. And Cody Rhodes is hitting him, and you could tell Malakai's like this because he doesn't want to spit it out. But eventually he spits it in his face, rolls up, gets the victory. I would hope that this means the Malakai Black Cody feud's over. It was the right result. Malakai Black needs not to be protected, but he shouldn't be losing this early. And Cody's Cody Rhodes. It doesn't matter if he wins or loses. So he can take a loss. He's fine. He's a big star, remember. He's a big star. He's got a reality show. But for me, this would be a wake-up call. This would be a wake-up call because, AEW and Cody Rhodes can try and position himself as, I'm AEW's John Cena, or it doesn't matter if I'm getting a negative reaction or a positive reaction. I'm getting a reaction. I'm polarizing. I'm controversial. No. Enough with that. That's a WWE line. That's a WWE line. It doesn't matter what noise they're making. If they're making noise, that's fine. All that kind of stuff. Come on. No. That's you not listening to your audience. And AEW prides themselves on listening to their audience and giving them what they want and being in touch and changing things. You can't tell me just because Cody Rhodes is on the TBS Go Big show or he's got a reality show that he can't turn heel. At the end of the day, first and foremost, he's a pro wrestler. If he thinks that he's too untouchable, that he can't turn heel because he's on some reality show for the company, that's nuts. So hopefully this is the beginning of a heel turn. Whether it is or not, time will tell. But again, the match, I did think, in fairness, just didn't get to the level that I think a lot of people thought it would, which in fairness was quite disappointing. One match, though, that did live up to expectations and more was Sting and Darby Allin versus FTR. I tell you what, if this show didn't have Bryan Danielson versus Kenny Omega on, this would have been match of the night. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I mentioned it on the watch along. Look, when Sting signed with AEW in December 2020, I thought he was just going to be a manager, or I thought he was going to be just an on-screen character or something like that. And then there was rumors that he was going to wrestle, and I was like, pfft. And they said cinematic matches, and I thought, you know what, he could do a cinematic match. That is what it is. But this is a guy that the last time we saw him wrestle in the ring, he was nearly paralyzed. He lost feelings in his arms and his legs. And then he retired, and he got inducted into the Hall of Fame, and WWE wouldn't clear him, all this kind of stuff, and it was concerning, very concerning. And I thought, look, irrespective of how healthy Sting is or isn't, he's 62 years old as well, and that was a concern of mine. All this stuff, like that was, why wouldn't that be a concern? And if you've watched the channel for any period of time, you'll know me. I'm more than happy to admit if I'm wrong. More than happy to admit if I'm wrong. And when it comes to Sting wrestling at 62 years old or in his 60s, I was wrong. I was wrong when, I was proved wrong when he did the cinematic match, and I thought, well, it was a cinematic match, but I was proved wrong when he wrestled at Double or Nothing. I was wrong when he wrestled 2.0, and I think arguably this has been his most impressive match. Tonight, Sting wrestled a match. This wasn't smoke and mirrors. This wasn't Darby takes the majority of the bumps. This wasn't Darby takes the majority of the heat. They still did that because that's the formula. But Sting took bumps. Sting wrestled tonight, and he had a damn good match, and the crowd loved it. The crowd absolutely loved it. That crowd, it was difficult to follow what was a world-class opener, because that's what it was. It was a world-class opener by two world-class talent, two of the best pro wrestlers in the world today, Bryan Danielson versus Kenny Omega. That's nobody could follow that. But the way you do kind of go on after it is by doing a match that's fun, and doing a match that's different, and doing a match that kind of just is the complete antithesis of technical pro wrestling. This was old school tag team wrestling with psychology, and look, there's a guy who wrestled in the 80s, so he knows how to do old school tag team wrestling. But you got Tully on the outside. FTR I thought were tremendous. I have seen some people saying that maybe this was a match that FTR should have won, and I think maybe that is fair. They are a tag team at the end of the day, but I don't think they got no problem putting over Darby Allin and Sting. And if anything, the first person to defeat Sting or pin Sting in AEW should be Darby Allin. And then that should be Sting's final match. That's how they should do it. Now, I don't know how long Sting plans to wrestle for. I don't know how long he's had a contract for. I don't know if he said to Tony Khan, look, I'll wrestle for a year, and then for another year I'll be a manager or I'll be an agent. I don't know what the plan is. For me, Sting should not lose until his retirement match. That should be against Darby Allin. That should be the story. And for a team that's a guy in his 60s and a guy in his 20s, they make a damn good team. They really, really do make a damn good team. And it's interesting because when are we going to see them involved in the AEW tag team picture? They beat one of the top-ranked tag teams today. Are we going to see Darby Allin and Sting versus the Lucha Brothers? Are we going to see Darby Allin and Sting versus the Young Bucks? How is that match even going to look like? I think that's something to consider as well. But yeah, this one was a lot of fun. It really was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it immensely. I think that... Again, not that you can't improve on Bryan Danielson, Kenny Omega tonight, but this was certainly so much fun, so much fun, and it'll be interesting to see after Rampage airs on Friday about what is how high will this match rank in terms of the matches overall that we saw on the night, because I think it'll be right up there. I really do. It was a lot of fun, and Sting can still go. Like I said, massively, he can still go. Main event was for the Women's World Championship. Dr. Britt Baker, D.M.D, defeated Ruby Soho to retain her championship. this was a tough spot. It was even, which is funny because it's the main event. Look, I'm very happy this was the main event. Very, very happy. Like I said earlier on, I think it was the right call to have the Danielson Omega match open the show because of timing, because of the time limit draw, because of the finish. Everything makes sense for me. And this was a huge opportunity for the females. I've been a big advocate of the women main eventing more shows. I've been a huge advocate of the women having more matches on the show because I don't think they have enough. And the proof's in the pudding. And they main evented tonight. And like I said, it speaks volumes to what AEW thinks of Britt Baker. Britt Baker is one of the biggest stars in the company today, male or female, irrespective of gender. She's one of the biggest stars in the company today. And the proof is in the pudding that in arguably the biggest show in AEW's history, the biggest episode of Dynamite in AEW's history, in front of the biggest crowd in AEW's history, they had Britt Baker main event that show. And and it speaks volumes. I thought the match was fine. I think it struggled from a bit of a tired crowd, which is interesting considering that we've got another 2-hour show coming up on Friday that they're taping right now. I think the crowd, because again, it's weird how it kind of plays out, because for us, it's the main event. For the viewing audience, it's halfway through the show. And it kind of did maybe feel like that. And again, maybe that goes into the way that they laid out tonight's show, thinking that, you know what, actually, it's difficult because what the crowd are watching is a 4-hour pay-per-view, but what the fans at home are watching is a 2-hour broadcast. And how do we find the happy medium in that? And I think that's kind of interesting to consider as well. But Britt Baker gets the victory after a bit of interference from Rebel and Jamie Hayter. She locks in lockjaw, gets the victory. To be fair, Ruby Soho kicked out of a ton of her offense, kicked out of stomps, kicked out of everything. Fishman's neck breakers, but it's not surprising that Baker retained the championship. I expected her to. The big match they're building to is Britt Baker versus Thunder Rosa. That's the big one, isn't it? When that will happen, I don't know. Whether that'll be Full Gear, whether they'll hold off until Revolution. That's the one. It's Baker versus Thunder Rosa. Of course, Thunder Rosa does own a victory over Britt Baker. It was a lights out match. It was, in my opinion, still to this day, the greatest women's match in AEW history. First time that females are main evented Dynamite. First time the females that were in a lights out match. And I hope, and I don't know if they will do this, but I would hope that when we get to Britt Baker versus Thunder Rosa 2, that should main event the pay-per-view that it's on. If that's Full Gear, then so be it. That's why I don't know if they'll do it so quickly as Full Gear. But whatever pay-per-view it's on, give them the ball. Give them the ball and run with it. Make a main event the pay-per-view. And they can pull it off. They pulled it off when they had the match earlier this year on Dynamite, that St. Patrick's Day Slam match. They'll do exactly the same on a pay-per-view. But as for what's next for Ruby Soho, I could see her possibly feuding with maybe Jamie Hayter, considering they could spin off and say, well, you cost me the Women's Championship, so I'm going to feud with you going forward on AEW television. I think they might go into that kind of situation. But overall, what can you say? Great show. It's historic. It's one of those shows that I almost find difficult to and I don't really grade shows in these match reactions or anything like that. But for me, like I said, it felt just historic. And certainly that opening match. If you're watching this and you haven't seen that Bryan Danielson Kenny Omega match, stop watching. Like honestly, right now, go watch it. Even if you're watching this now, go watch it again. Because it was special. It was special, and it's a very rare occasion that a dream match truly lived up to the hype, and that doesn't happen that often. It really doesn't happen that often. So that was special, and it's only the beginning. That's what's crazy, is it felt like, didn't it, tonight, because of the time limit draw, because of the outcome, that this was only the beginning, and we're going to see something great. And this is just the beginning of just dream matches in general that we haven't seen before, that we're going to see in AEW. Whether it is Kenny Omega, Bryan Danielson, whether it's Kenny Omega versus CM Punk, whether it's CM Punk and Bryan Danielson versus the Young Bucks. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. Of all of these amazing matches we thought were impossible that we are going to see. Even like, we saw Malakai Black tonight. Imagine Malakai Black versus CM Punk. Malakai Black versus Bryan Danielson. We're going to see all that. How unbelievable is that? It's so exciting. Such an exciting time to be a pro wrestling fan, and what a great show. So be sure to smash a like on the video. Be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner. It is nearly 4 a.m. Well, it's just past 3:30, actually, over here in the UK. So I'm going to go to sleep. I've nearly been up 24 hours. So I appreciate everyone that's tuned in tonight. Be sure to smash a like on the video. Be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this stream today. And I hope, obviously, that you've enjoyed the AEW Dynamite Grand Slam edition from Arthur Ashe Stadium. But we'll be back Friday for Rampage Grand Slam. But I'll speak for you again very, very